It's Wednesday, October 9th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast. It is a hell of a day to talk ball, and joining me to do just that is Sal Vetri. Sal, what's going on, buddy?
Not much, man. We finally got a week with some points in the NFL, and I'm looking ahead a little bit to week 6, as we'll do also in this pod today. And I'm seeing some games with 50-point totals, 48, 49. So maybe the whole defenses are winning in the NFL this year is starting to turn a little bit, at least for now.
For now, for sure. And I think that, look, this is how the league works. Things are always cyclical. We always kind of overreact to what is happening in the moment. And I think we probably did maybe a little bit too much meta-analysis, maybe too much hand-wringing. And I'm not saying us, not us true ball knowers, Sal, but some people maybe did a little bit too much hand-wringing about the offensive decline and things like that. We got to remember, these teams don't really do preseason. They certainly don't do training camp as hard as they used to back in the good old days. So there's going to be some slow starts across the league. I think we've seen that for multiple teams, and it does seem like things are getting on track. And I'm agreeing with you here that I look at this week 6 schedule. I see a lot of potentially really interesting spots. We'll get into all that here, as we always do on the Wednesday data dump episode. We'll turn the page from week 5. We'll start to preview week 6 via a stats-based lens. But before we do that, Sal, we do have to talk about some big breaking news. We have literally this morning our first head coach firing in the NFL. Jets head coach Robert Saleh has been relieved of his duties just 5 games into the 2024 NFL season. The Jets have promoted defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich to the interim head coaching job. This is the first time a Jets head coach has been fired in season ever, which I found pretty surprising. Because the Jets have just generally been a bit of a train wreck, especially in recent memory. So that did take me off guard a little bit here. Sal, I'm curious, what was your reaction to this news? Because I'll tell you what, man, I was in the middle of my general work prep, the whole thing. I saw this notification came through, and I definitely had a very audible reaction to this one.
Yeah, I thought it was a fake Twitter account when it first popped up, one of those just fake accounts. So I had to go in there. But yeah, I was surprised. It's a 2-3 team. They're a game out of first place. It's not like anything has looked drastically terrible. The secondary is great. Defensive line, you haven't had Hassan Reddick all year. And I bring up the defense because that's what Robert Saleh is responsible for, that side of the ball. And I think it's looked fine. I think if anything, it's the offense. It's the offensive line. It's adjusting in game. They're coming off of a game where they had a chance to win on a game-winning drive. Rodgers threw a pick. Game before that bad weather game, they lose 10-9, a wonky game. 2 wins before that. So it's kind of surprising. Yes, they have the longest playoff drought, and I believe the major sports right now, the 4 major sports of any pro team. So that's maybe on the minds of some of these owners. But I'm feeling like maybe we'll get some more information on some other things behind the scenes going on right now. Man, that's the only thing I can think of, because the performances don't really warrant being fired in week 5.
Yeah, so I generally do agree with a lot of what you said there. The only 2 things that, and I'll kind of disagree with my own. I mean, I was shocked that Robert Saleh got fired here, but if you think about just the way things have been going for this team, it does seem like there's a little bit of a powder keg here. Like we're sitting on maybe where there's smoke, there's fire type of a situation with this, because you just think back to comments a couple of weeks ago. Well, actually, not even that. Let me go back 3 games ago when the Jets blew out the Patriots on Thursday Night Football, and there was that weird, Robert Saleh tries to hug Aaron Rodgers and he kind of pushes him away. That was a bit of a weird thing. There was the comments 2 games ago after they lose to the Broncos where Saleh says in the press conference, maybe we can cut down on the cadence to try to, which is the whole Aaron Rodgers thing. That's his whole approach to being a quarterback. Maybe we can cut back on that to try to dial back some of these offensive line penalties and mistakes and things like that. And Rodgers immediately afterwards in his press conference says, or, we could just hold guys accountable, right? So it does seem like there's been some tension brewing for quite some time between Rodgers and his contingent and Saleh. Also, you look at the results, this is a results-based business. They have never once been a good team under Robert Saleh. He has a horrible record as a head coach. A lot of that is the offensive side of the football, but hey man, you're the head coach. The buck stops with you. You're responsible to the staff. I know that there's only one reason that they have Nate Hackett as the offensive coordinator. It's because they wanted Aaron Rodgers there, but this is the staff that you as the head coach have put together, whether it was really your guy or not. Of course, it's not really his guy. He's there because Rodgers wants him, but that's just the way this thing goes, man. You tie yourself to the Aaron Rodgers experience, you're going to live and die with it. And unfortunately, his head coaching tenure has come to an end because of it.
Yeah, and I think that's what it really probably comes down to is the relationship. At this point, you're probably not going to fire Hackett at this point in the season, 5 weeks in, and just potentially lose even more, some sort of strife with Aaron Rodgers, your quarterback, who is really the whole reason this offseason and season in general is built around. So, yeah, I think at this point, they're probably going to move forward. Interim head coach comes in along with the team, another defensive-minded coach, and you're hoping that you turn it around in a big game against the Bills this week for the division, and you roll from there. Devontae Adams trade rumors are still intact. Both teams reportedly as of an hour ago, or both sides want to be together. So maybe there's some bright spots coming here, but I was surprised by this move.
Yeah, definitely surprised by it. And even if I can get my head wrapped around it, and I obviously think I have a good understanding of what's going on here, still a shock. We're only 6 weeks into the end. We're heading into week 6. We've only had 5 games so far. They're coming off a international game. So a lot going on here. I don't think this changes anything from a brass tacks fantasy perspective. You know, we talked about Breece Hall, Dalton and I did yesterday on the Panic Meter podcast. Like, Nate Hackett is still the offense coordinator. Dude, even if Nate Hackett had somehow been the one to get fired here, you know, they're not changing offenses midstream. Like, this is the offense. This is what it's going to be like. So Robert Saleh leaving does not give like a bump to anybody from a fantasy football perspective. So that just kind of is what it is with the Jets. But okay, unless you have anything else, Sal, I think we can move into the data dump here and start getting into some of these stats. I'll kick us off this week. Welcome to the data dump for post week 5.
Yes, science.
My calculations are correct. You're going to see some serious.
My first stat that I want people to talk, or that I want us to talk about here, is from Next Gen Stats on Washington's passing game. So far this season, according to Next Gen Stats, Terry McLaurin has run a vertical route on 41.1% of his routes, his highest vertical route rate since his rookie season, which was 42.7%. He has hauled in 4 of his 12 targets on vertical routes for 158 yards. That's the 10th most in the NFL, and he has 2 touchdowns on such routes. Terry McLaurin has generated 7.4 EPA on vertical targets this season, which is more than he generated on vertical routes all of last season. Pretty impressive there. Meanwhile, talk about Jaden Daniels here. He's completed 7 of 8 passes for 113 yards on scrambles this season. I pointed this out on the recap show that I think we've started to see, especially last week, in a more difficult matchup. We've seen Daniels scramble with the intent to throw, or at least keeping that option to throw a little bit more than we did early in the season, which I think represents growth and development. He's also rushed for 244 yards on scramble dropbacks as well. So I say all this, Sal, to just kind of put it into context here, this matchup in week 6, because this is a game. I look at Washington and Baltimore. I don't know if this is one of the matchups that you had circled, but I could see this one being pretty high scoring in this one, and really like an interesting fantasy game, because definitely expect the Ravens offense to be able to handle Washington's defense. Rather sneakily, though, the Ravens defense, which we generally have respect for, has turned into a little bit of a pass funnel defense. Like, they're great against the run, but you can throw on them. And with the way I think Daniels has gotten better each and every week, forget the stats and the results, I was impressed by what we saw last week. He's gotten better every single week, and Terry McLaurin is being used as this pure vertical receiver, and he's doing great, as Next Gen Stats shows. He's doing great in this role. I could see this game getting pretty high scoring. So while I think the most fantasy pods will talk about this as another big test for Jaden Daniels, Ravens defense, I don't know if that's necessarily the case, just because of where they've played, or the way the Ravens have played for most of their games this year.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about Daniels, McLaurin in this matchup. I'm concerned. I started writing a piece for Yahoo this week, and part of it is a sketchy spot of the week for Brian Robinson, if anything, the run game. And I think that is exactly what you're talking about here, turning into a pass funnel for the Ravens, who lost pieces of their secondary this offseason, who haven't just been playing, you could say, up to par so far this year in their secondary. So I think it's a nice spot. Yeah, Terry McLaurin, 57% of his team's air yards is the second highest in the NFL right now. He has a lot of big play upside when you're going to factor that in. Like you said, based on past years, a lot more downfield usage. It's already leading to touchdowns. Almost had another one this past week. Had a toe tap touchdown just out of bounds as well in week 5. And the thing that's nice about it is it's almost like this perfect balance, at least through 5 weeks, of you're getting some of this air raid stuff, these short targets for Terry McLaurin still. His average depth of target is right around 13 yards, which is great. You have the upside of these deep plays like we just saw this past week, a 60-plus yard reception, along with sort of a base level of like, okay, you're probably getting 3 or 4 catches no matter what from McLaurin in these PPR, half PPR formats. So this is a guy who week 1, we were worried about McLaurin. It looked like the training wheels were on in this offense. They quickly came off, and now McLaurin's probably a top 50 rest of season player. Daniel's pushing towards the QB1 overall, and things are feeling good if you have either of those guys on your team.
Yeah, the Ravens are 20th in dropback success rate allowed, and they're number 1 in the NFL in rushing success rate allowed. So this certainly looks like one of those, one of those funnel defenses that really the only time I thought the pass defenses looked good is when they could man up and, press the hell out of these Bills wide receivers a couple of weeks ago. So I don't necessarily see that taking place here with Terry McLaurin because, man, I want you to kind of heat check me on this, Sal, because I have long been a big-time Terry McLaurin fan. Of course, this is probably the one year I didn't draft him because I was worried a little bit about the Cliff Kingsbury offense and some of that air raid stuff. We're dealing with the rookie quarterback. I have a little bit of Terry McLaurin, not a lot of Terry McLaurin. Right now, he's the wide receiver 25 on the season, which is actually a little higher than where he was drafted. I had him ranked a little bit ahead of consensus. He was generally going outside the top 30 receivers. This is right around where I had him ranked as wide receiver 24, 25. Do you think because we're starting to see this offense coalesce, because we're seeing Daniels get better and better, because we're seeing Cliff Kingsbury call these shot plays for Terry McLaurin, like what do you think his upside is as a player? Could he be a guy that gets into the top 12 receivers, or maybe more like top 15, top 20? Kind of give me like a temperature check on Terry McLaurin, because I am a biased and compromised source when we're talking about this player.
Yeah, right around that top 15 range is what I think his upside is. I mean, it all comes down to touchdowns. If he's having touchdown luck, then you get into the top 10. But for me right now, Terry McLaurin is in my top 50 overall players the rest of the season. I updated it this morning. He's right around like the T. Higgins range, the Brian Thomas Jr. range for me, right ahead of Zay Flowers. That's kind of the range. Jaden Reed, he's right behind. That's the range that I'm viewing him as right now. Wide receiver 21, wide receiver 22, rest of the season as of today. And I think that's only trending in the right direction based on the usage every single week.
Yeah, Washington gets Baltimore this week. Then they get Carolina in week 7. So could be a couple of nice games for Terry McLaurin back-to-back, continuing that momentum. Mentioned the Panthers. The quarterback that just tore them up last week was the number 1 overall pick. We just talked about the number 2 overall pick. Let's talk about Caleb Williams there and the Bears offense. Caleb Williams took 30 of his 35 dropbacks from 11 personnel last week, and we only saw 3 wide receivers on the field for the Bears. Really interesting development here. Obviously 11 personnel is when you've got 1 back, 1 tight end, so 3 wide receivers on the field. Only 3 wide receivers played for the Bears. Rome Odunze, 88.6% route participation, 6 targets. DJ Moore, 88.6% route participation, 8 targets. Keenan Allen, 88.6% route participation, 6 targets. I thought this was really cool to see, Sal, because I think that the Bears have talked about this a lot on the show. They're like almost trying to do too much, right? They're getting these like gimmicky plays in for the tight ends. I kind of like some of the screen stuff I've seen, for the DeAndre Swift part of this. That's been encouraging, but they're not trying to have him do like design target stuff. They've cut that out. Just be a screen guy, and he can be pretty dynamic there because he doesn't have to like run option routes and things like that, the areas where he really struggles. But the fact that we've got these 3 wide receivers, we're concentrating targets, we're concentrating playing times for these guys. I think it's really good news for Rome Odunze. I think it's really good news for DJ Moore. And these guys are heading into a matchup here in week 6 with the Jaguars defense, which plays a bunch of man coverage and is not very good at playing man coverage.
Yeah, we got DeAndre Carter out of the route rotation here this past week. So that's a tip of the cap, something good to see. I think, it's encouraging. And maybe it's just, at least to this point, as simple as if you're not facing a top pass rush, this Bears offensive line, like play all your Bears. We saw it a couple weeks ago with the Colts. They have a compromised defensive line, injuries right now, and you go for a bunch of 100 yards for Odunze. Everybody's playing well. Keenan Allen comes back this week. Panthers might have the worst pass rush in the NFL. It's right down there. And yet again, another 300-yard day. All the wide receivers have solid usage. You can take that extra tight end off the field if you're worried about your offensive line and need another blocker. Wasn't there this past week at all, as you were mentioning. So, I think everybody, Rome Odunze specifically, looks like a buy low candidate candidate for me for the second straight week, coming off of 2 games where he didn't really pop off. We saw it this last week. I think it was his first target of the game. He comes in motion across the formation, gets a nice 11-yard gain, being used in interesting ways. Comes in motion into the slot, by the way, on that play. We've seen it in past games as well, where he's getting outside downfield usage, and that's probably going to be mostly his role this season, but he's getting used in different ways kind of slowly, and the offense, at least when they're not facing a top pass rush right now, looks like it could hold its own.
Yeah, and I mean, again, Jacksonville is a bottom half pressure rate team. And then beyond that, man, like they go on the bye in week 7. Then they get the Commanders in week 8. They get the Cardinals in week 9. 2 other kind of bottom of the league pass rushes overall. Obviously, Washington has some pretty good players up front. They're definitely, I would say, the best rush team of all of these players, but still not exactly, I would say, their strength is their pass defense overall. That's a really nice schedule for these guys. I'm glad that you highlighted Rome Odunze, who I continue to beat the drum for as a guy that looks really good on film when you're charting him, when you're watching the routes. I like that they're lining him up at multiple positions. I like that they've cut kind of the gimmicky guys out of this offense. Look, I've been hard on what Shane Waldron's doing from an offensive perspective, but I think that this was an encouraging sign to see. It's still the Panthers. I get that, but man, if Rome can be out there getting 6 targets, running 88% of the routes, and getting some more downfield usage, being used in creative ways, as you pointed out, Caleb's starting to look more comfortable, starting to, I think, settle in a little bit. We got these 3 matchups in their next 3 games: Jacksonville, Washington, Arizona. Now could certainly be a really good time to buy on a guy like Rome Odunze, and that might give us, some top 12 performances from Caleb Williams as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also to point out that, like, reminder, Caleb Williams is a rookie, and every single week, I'm already impressed with how he's processing the game, just from what we can see on our end and what we know, at least, not knowing the play calling exactly. And it looks good. Every week, that's going to get better, especially when you talk about the buys coming up. They can make adjustments. They can look at some stuff deeper. It's a new offense. Like, Keenan Allen is new to this team, has been injured. A rookie in Rome Odunze, a rookie in Caleb Williams. I think it's going to take a couple weeks. We've mentioned on this show already today how the preseason and the lack of usage during that is probably playing into a lot of offenses. I think that also works here. And I think as the weeks go on, you'll start to see it just become a little bit more developed and flourish.
It feels like every one of the biggest overreactions from, like week 1, week 2, things like that, will all come down to these teams that did not play a lot in the preseason or are very new. And that's such a great point, because even the guy that's like established in this offense, DJ Moore, he doesn't have any rhythm or chemistry with Caleb Williams. And you could feel that at times this season. And I think he's been frustrated at times just with the way the offense has flowed and things like that. But it feels like everybody is settling in here, and that's going to be good, I think, for all of these Bears players. I don't think Keenan Allen has big fantasy upside or anything like that, but he can just be a helpful figure in this offense to keep it moving. But Rome Odunze is definitely the guy I want to be buying, especially once he comes out of his bye week, post-bye rookie bump, the whole thing. I'm very excited about what I saw out of the Bears last week. Obviously, caveat included that it was the Carolina Panthers. But another team that is brand new is a group that I want to talk about in this next stat, which is the top 5 neutral pass rate teams the last 2 weeks. Seattle is number 1 at 75%. The Browns are number 2 at 71.7%. The Bucks are number 3 at 67.4%. The Jets are 64.3%, number 4. And number 5, the Atlanta Falcons, 63.7%. Obviously, the Bucks and the Falcons are 2 teams I kind of want to highlight here because, man, Sal, like I think we're going to get some, obviously we got to see what Derek Carr's injury status looks like, but I think we're going to get some shootouts between these NFC South teams because I feel like both the Bucks and the Falcons are leaning into their pass game right now. I think that makes a lot of sense for those teams. And neither one of them can defend the pass either. So, like, again, we've got a matchup this week. We'll see what happens with Derek Carr, but we've got the Saints and the Bucks getting together. That could be a high-scoring affair. We've got the Panthers and Falcons getting together. That could be a high-scoring affair. Generally, I have a lot of optimism for the passing game of these 2 NFC South teams. Any reaction to just kind of the teams on this top 5 here?
Yeah, the new play callers. I mean, we were like kind of questionable on what Liam Cohen would look like. Dave Canales was a very, you could say, favorable coach for a lot of fantasy analysts and just analysts in general this offseason going over to the Panthers. What would that void leave for Mike Evans, who had a big season with Baker Mayfield, Rachaad White? And for the most part, outside of Rachaad White, this passing attack at least has still looked great. Baker's looked awesome, 3 touchdown passes in the first half on Thursday Night Football. Evans and Godwin are having awesome starts to the season. And I think a lot of that we have to credit to the play caller, Liam Coleman. Maybe we get stability in that moving forward as long as Baker is comfortable and being put in spots to succeed, which so far is what I've seen, at least the throws that he's being asked to make. And then on the Falcons side of it, we kind of touched on this last week, but after that week one, you can call it like a disaster or panic around Kirk Cousins and how he's looked. Well, now he's had a month to get even more healthy off of his Achilles surgery. He's been looking a lot better. I mean, you don't throw for 500 yards and ask to drop back on 50, 60 times in Thursday Night Football if you're not able to, go out there and produce. So I think both these offenses look good. There's key contributors, if not 2, 3 in the passing game for each of them. Darnell Mooney coming alive right now. If you have these guys, it feels nice. You could also throw in the Panthers, like you mentioned, in that. The defenses and secondaries in this division, not great right now, so a nice spot to be targeting.
Yeah, I love the fact that you highlight the Falcons, too, are a pretty concentrated target tree. Obviously, Kyle Pitts gets in the mix here, but we've got 2 players over 20% target rate in the Atlanta Falcons offense. We've got Darnell Mooney, we've got Drake London. Drake London leading the way with 44 targets on this team right now. Love the usage for Drake London. Haven't really gotten to talk about this on the pod just because the game happened Thursday. That's just generally how it goes. But, man, they were using him in the exact way, Sal, that I wanted to see him used this year. And honestly, I wanted to see him used this way his entire NFL career. Like, that dude's a big body. He's a great route runner. He's super flexible. Like, play him in the slot. Let him smash zone coverage and get yards after catch. That was, I think, and look, obviously Arthur Smith didn't do a lot of things that people liked in his 2 years or his 3 years as the Falcons coach, the first 2 years of Drake London's career. But man, the thing that I thought always was left on the table was Drake London's yards after catch ability. And a lot of that was his deployment, the way they lined him up. I've been talking about that all year, that the Falcons have lined up London in a great way this year, using him in motion, off the ball, almost in kind of like some of these Puka Nacua type routes, some of the Cooper Kupp type stuff we've seen in the Rams offense. Obviously, that's where Zach Robinson comes from. And you saw that. And look, the Bucs defense stinks. Like, that's all part of this too. But the routes over the middle of the field, having him set up for yards after catch, that makes me think like, oh yeah, Drake London, at times we've thought, okay, maybe he's going to be a big miss after that week one early reaction. Sometimes maybe like a small miss. We'll see how Kirk Cousins goes. That usage combined with the way they're calling plays, with the way that he's being deployed in some of these higher scoring NFC South games, I'm actually now kind of just back to like, yep, Drake London was a good pick at wide receiver 11, 12, however off he went in the board here.
Yeah, exactly. He went in the second round. Right now, if we redrafted today, I think he's still an early to mid second round pick. And since week one, there's very few wide receivers, especially factoring in some injuries, that you would want in fantasy over Drake London. The volume that he's getting, the role that you just touched on, everything's looking good for him specifically, and it's only going to keep getting better for Kirk Cousins in terms of how confident he is, both physically and mentally, in his Achilles. And it looks like this past week might have been kind of everything hitting a boiling point, and he looks good, and he's fine to drop back because everything was good. It wasn't just that he had to throw a lot. He was also looking good on that. Yeah. You don't throw for 500 yards without hitting some impressive throws. So Drake London's trending up, pushing towards that top 15 for me, rest of season players.
Yeah, and obviously the other 3 teams here that are not in the NFC South. We'll talk about the Seahawks in the back half when we hit on your stats. I know you got a note on them. We definitely don't even talk about the damn Browns, and I think we've covered enough about the Jets so far. So let's move on to my 4th one here. Trey Sermon, week 5 usage without Jonathan Taylor. Played 58% of the snaps. He led the backfield with 50% of the team carries, and he had a 13.3% target share. I wanted to bring up Trey Sermon because we didn't talk about him in the waiver wire section on yesterday's show. Maybe a little bit of a miss by me. We didn't talk about him there. I don't think we really hit on him too much on the recap. But man, I think this was a pretty good role for Trey Sermon, and it wasn't the most efficient rushing day. He's not I don't think ever going to be the most efficient player, but obviously from a bottom line fantasy perspective, he catches those passes, he gets in the end zone. I don't know what if you have Trey Sermon and Jonathan Taylor misses another game, do you think he's like, where is he in terms of fantasy rankings heading into this week?
Yeah, factoring in, to answer your question, factoring in bye weeks, probably right around like my RB 24 range, something like that. I know he had the nice week this past week, but I'm just skeptical of it. I'm sitting here with so much Jonathan Taylor. I got screwed in so many leagues with like the 10th overall pick, just the worst spot to be in fantasy. So I have a lot of Jonathan Taylor, and I'm thinking to myself, why couldn't this be JT? Why couldn't the 6-target game, you're actually targeting your running backs with Joe Flacco, be JT? Because I'm watching the Trey Sermon. I watched the 10 carries this morning. It's a bunch of 0 to 4 yard gains. Yeah. He had a 17-yard run on a 1st and 15 in the fourth quarter where it's an inside handoff delayed. There's a hole that's like 10 feet. So he got the 17 yards. That was impressive. But 6 checkdown targets, no explosive plays there either, nothing over 8 yards. And I don't really know what's going to happen when Anthony Richardson comes back. Like, will he see 6 targets? Probably not. Will Anthony Richardson play this week? There's a chance that he can trend in that direction. I don't think Joe Flacco is like all of a sudden the starter. It's looked good under Flacco, but you still got to see what you have in Anthony Richardson. So I'm a little bit skeptical. I think you add him for sure.
Yeah.
I think if you add him and you're facing some bye week issues with 1 to 2 flexes in your league, you're probably just forced to start him. He's going to see. There's nobody else here. Tyler Goodson is an exciting player from like an athletic standpoint, can catch some passes, but it was pretty seen last week that Goodson's not going to be involved in the passing game over Sermon, at least right now. So you're probably looking at a 14-15 opportunity back with red zone usage, a bigger back. So yeah, you're going to start him if you have him on your team in most leagues at this point. But it's hard for me to get excited. The thing I will say, Joe Mixon hasn't returned now from his ankle injury in a month. Maybe there was some sort of re-injury there, but they're saying Jonathan Taylor's like, it's only going to be a couple days. It's a mild hamstring strain. It's high ankle. Like, that's minimum 2 to 4 weeks most of the time. So I think we're not going to see Taylor for a while, which means you probably have a starting running back for the next 2 to 4 weeks.
Yeah, and he's had ankle issues before. Jonathan Taylor ruined his 2022 season. By all reports, this is not. They're saying it's not as serious as that one. I was reading a report today from the Indy Star that Jonathan Taylor's quote feeling good. They were mostly positive about it last week until it was time to rule him out for the game. So I don't really think we're going to get any clarity there in terms of until Sunday. Like, I don't think we'll get any clarity about that. But you mentioned bye weeks. Like, Rams are on bye, Dolphins are on bye, Vikings, Aaron Jones, obviously he's dinged up, but they're on bye. Even if you've been riding the Kareem Hunt train, he's on bye this week. So there are going to be people that need help at running back, and I think Sermon's going to, I like your call there about him being kind of a, very low end running back too. Mostly just because I don't know how this game is going to go. That, like, the Titans defense has been one of the most underrated units in the NFL this year. I think Anthony Richardson certainly brings down the ceiling projection of this offense just because the pass game's not going to flow as well, most likely, especially if he's coming off of an injury. So it's tough. Like, we're kind of going touchdown or bust here with Trey Sermon, but if he's going to dominate the backfield, get this type of usage, 13% target share, lead the team in carries, you can't really totally turn your nose up at it. So he's definitely someone that I think is an option for people here in week 6. Final stat that I want to talk about, and it is about a team on bye, but I think this is a pressing situation we should discuss. Chiefs route participation on 44 Patrick Mahomes dropbacks on Monday Night Football against the New Orleans Saints. Travis Kelce leads the way with 38 routes, 10 targets on those routes. Xavier Worthy, 35 routes, number 2 on the team, but just 6 targets. Justin Watson in the sacrificial X receiver role runs 31 routes, 0 targets. Incredible stuff. Then Juju Smith-Schuster, 29 routes, 8 targets. Noah Gray, 21 routes, 2 targets. Kareem Hunt, 18 routes, 1 target. Samaje Perine, 15 routes, 2 targets. Mecole Hardman getting the ball when he's on the field. Only 6 routes, but 4 targets. I obviously want to know your reaction to seeing Juju Smith-Schuster balling out like it's 2018. But, look, I think a couple things we could take away from this overall usage here is that tight ends, running backs, those guys are in the mix. Not as much rotation with the wide receivers. It's not like we saw any Sky Moore. It's not like we saw any of these other dudes that are on the roster. For the most part, they have a very small bit of players that they're kind of trusting here, which makes sense because they're already so banged up. They're already kind of deep in the bag in terms of the roster. But man, I think if we get that, look, the Chiefs offense is going to have a lower ceiling than we thought this year. But if we're getting concentrated usage for guys like Juju and obviously Travis Kelce as well, yeah, shoot, like these guys are going to be in a really good spot from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, and I would say from a usage standpoint, it is what I expected. Not from a production standpoint. I don't think anybody expected 130 yards from Juju Smith-Schuster. The betting markets had him in the 30 to 40 yard range. So it was a great game for him. And if you watch the game, the first half, it was like, okay, they're going to run the ball. Kareem Hunt's there. He's getting carries. Travis Kelce's getting spam. This is kind of what we expected. But then it kind of stalled in the second quarter. Neither offense was doing anything. And in the second half, they found something with Juju in space. He had 81 yards after the catch. I was going to come on here and say, like, yeah, like Juju, kind of the fill-in Rashee Rice. It's kind of what you expect based on body type, his style at this point where he wins, and who else is on this roster for them. And that's what you got. And then I was going to say, but not as explosive or dynamic after the catch as Rice. And largely that's the case at this point in his career. But in this game, 81 yards after after the catch was second most on the week behind only Jamar Chase. They found that in the second half, and they just said, we're going to keep going back to that. It seemed like the Saints put a little bit more attention to Travis Kelce, probably opened up some more stuff for Juju, but there's no reason that can't continue in the future. Juju going on bye this week, maybe you don't have to spend as much of your fab budget if people don't want to pick up a guy who's not going to do anything for them this week if they need a starter. Kind of the reason why you're adding players during the buys anyways. So yeah, Juju is interesting. I'm not really expecting these bigger performances moving forward, but 5-6 plus target games and an offense where he's had some success in the past years as well. I think it's worth adding for sure, and some nice matchups coming out of the bye. Yeah,
some good matchups coming out of the bye, some potentially high scoring games there as well. I mean, some people did not like my Juju Smith-Schuster is basically Rashee Rice, like the old version of Rashee Rice comparison when I made it on Twitter and I made it on the pod too. Some people did not like that. Yo, go back and look at like Juju's early season or early career. In his rookie season, he had over 7 yards after the catch per reception. Rashee Rice, 7.8 yards after catch per reception. He was that same guy in his second season. You look at the way he was used last night, it's a lot of the quick little Rashee Rice routes. Like, I'm not saying you can just dump like any receiver into this role and they're going to be good. And I don't think Juju at this point of his career is as good as Rashee Rice. Rashee is definitely a more, I mean, I'm with you. I was ready to say like more explosive player, although Juju was looking pretty spry there on Monday night. But yeah, I mean, a competent veteran that's played in this role before as that power slot receiver. Yeah, you can like replace that production with a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster. So is he going to have the season that Rashee Rice was going to have this year? No, probably not. But I think he can give you kind of like I think he can give you like 80% of it, which makes him like a wide receiver 3 in fantasy, I would say. And somebody that, you know, look, it's 1 week. We'll see if he continues to get this role. But if he's going to run a route on over half of Mahomes' dropbacks and he's going to get targeted, and because they got to throw the ball somewhere, and it's going to be like 6.5 average depth of target like it was on Monday, those are going to be some layup. There's going to be some layup targets, man, and I think we'll continue to see that for Juju.
Yeah, I think we will. With them heading into the bye, maybe we finally see some sort of expansion or changing of the role for Xavier Worthy coming out of that, which could dampen what you get out of Juju in a performance like this, a ceiling type of a performance. But I also think going into the bye, you can kind of build off of what you just had in Juju and see what else he can do and how to make it more sustainable. So it's only a positive. He's available right now in the far majority of Yahoo leagues, so definitely worth an add.
Definitely worth an ad. Yeah, super curious to see what we get out of Xavier Worthy because it's still, in terms of where they're throwing him the football, it's 6.5 average depth of target on Monday. It's still a lot of the underneath stuff. You'd think at some point, I think what they'll have to do is figure out what they're doing from an offensive line perspective, figure out how to block things up more, and can we get him loose on some of those plays, and can Mahomes pull the trigger on those? Because so far he has been a little, far be it for me to criticize Pat Mahomes, but he has been a little, I think, hesitant to pull the trigger on some of these plays when they might be open downfield. So super curious. I'm with you to see what Xavier Worthy looks like coming out of this week 6 bye. All right, let's throw it to a break. When we come back, we're going to the 5 stats that Sal wants you to know heading into week 6 right after this. All right, we're back. Sal, I mentioned you want to talk Seahawks here for your first note of the week.
Yeah, I want to talk about their backfield and their number 1 running back, Kenneth Walker, specifically his pass, catch, and roll. The Seahawks this past week in the second half, they were trailing for most of that game against the Giants. Now, in past seasons, that's like, okay, Walker's going to lose some snaps, especially on third down. Guys like Travis Homer are going to come in. Maybe even like DJ Dallas's of the world, but not in this new Ryan Grubb offense. We saw Kenneth Walker out there. He ran 30 routes. For the second straight game, he ran at least 30 routes. Why is that important? In his first 30 career games, since his first 2 seasons basically as a Seahawk before Ryan Grubb got there, he ran 30 routes just 1 time in his career. These will lead to opportunities. They'll lead to targets, checkdowns, screens, design plays, and that's what we've seen. 13 targets the past 2 weeks out of Kenneth Walker, 11 receptions. Now, this isn't going to be sustainable all season, but in a game when your team gets down, if you can pick up a 7-catch performance like you did this past week, it will save you from your 5-carry, 19-yard performance like he had this past week, and you'll continue to be fantasy relevant and in lineups and pushing towards, at this point, with all the injuries and how the top guys like Breece and Bijan are playing, probably a top 5, borderline top 5 running back rest of the season, how he's performing in what looks like a quality offense. He came back a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago since then, handled 17 of 21 backfield carries. The injury doesn't seem to be an issue. Zach Charbonnet's success while Walker was out doesn't seem to be an issue. So right now, I'm liking what I'm getting out of Kenneth Walker. finally maybe we're getting him as like this game flow independent back, which was always the concern in past seasons. I think it's wheels up for Walker.
Yeah, especially because, like I mentioned, they're throwing the ball at the highest rate of the league the last 2 years, the last 2 weeks. Like, man, that's important to see Kenneth Walker out there from a pass game perspective. They get the Niners on Thursday Night Football. That's going to be a fun game to break down and analyze and stuff like that, because these are two teams that, it's a big division game. The 49ers definitely cannot afford to drop this game, but it's in Seattle, and I think Kenneth Walker is just balling right now. Obviously, from a stats perspective, we didn't totally see it last week, but man, he looks great out there. I generally still feel pretty good about where this offense is heading, and I'll tell you this too, Sal. Like the fact that I think after the last 2 weeks, I know they have had some injuries, but definitely less enthusiastic about the Seahawks defense than I was from the first 3 weeks. I think this team's going to have to put up a lot of points. So the fact that Walker is really rarely leaving the field from a situational standpoint, that's pretty critical to his upside.
Yeah, and that was like always the thing. Like Zach Charbonnet, when they drafted him, he's maybe a better athlete, but definitely a better pass catcher. Like that can be where he makes his due. And no, maybe he'll steal some red zone touches because he's also a big back. Well, as of right now, Ryan Grubb is saying no to all that. It's Kenneth Walker in the red zone at the goal line, and at least the last 2 weeks since returning from injury, it's also Kenneth Walker on the field for passing down situations. Now, since they're passing so much, I actually don't think that that's a good thing for them. Like for fantasy, yeah, but their offensive line is a little bit suspect. Maybe we get back to week 1 where it's a little bit more balanced, and even in that situation, you get a lot more carries for a great pure rusher in Walker, who has touchdown upside. I feel like there's a lot of outs to his games based on this current usage.
Talk about a great pure rusher. One of those guys might be stepping up in Jacksonville, as weird as it is to say. Tell me what you're seeing in that backfield there.
Yeah, Tank Bigsby, his explosive run rate right now is crazy. Heading into week 5, 19% of his carries went for at least 10 or more yards, which led the NFL. And then what does he do in week 5? Well, he has 2 more 10-plus yard carries. Both went for touchdowns. He has a reception for 20-plus yards. He's just making plays right now. He was the number 1 running back in all of fantasy in week 5 with over 100 yards and a couple of touchdowns on just 14 touches. I mean, you compare that to what Travis Etienne's doing right now, just 2 explosive runs this entire season on over 60 total touches. And the way that it's trending is, it looks like Tank Bigsby, a guy who last year dropped 3 of his 4 targets, 1 went for a pick 6, was barely averaging 2.5 yards per touch. How does he change into this all of a sudden explosive back 5 weeks into the season? It's probably just growth. Like if you're any person and you have a bad year at your job, maybe you want to get better the next year. And when you get some support from your coaches all off season, like Doug Peterson has been doing, that probably helps your confidence, which does go a long way. It seems like these guys are just robots out there, but I do think he had a great off season. And right now it's showing he's trending in the right direction. I don't think he's automatically the RB1 on the Jags moving forward, but rest of the season between him and Etienne, I think it's gotten really close now.
Shoot, I mean, just results right now, it's gotten really close. Travis Etienne is running back 26 on the season. Tank Bigsby is running back 31. Etienne has 53 carries. Bigsby only has 34. And I mean, from a pass game perspective, Bigsby's not been out there. Like Etienne's probably still going to be the passing down guy, although I don't think either of them is going to be like a huge target earner or anything like that. That's just not their profile. It's not really what they want to ask of their running backs there. But yeah, that gap is closing, and yeah, I don't think Bigsby's going to – depends on what you mean by the guy. I don't think necessarily he's going to just – I mean, obviously not push Etienne completely to the side, but what are the odds that in 4 weeks we've just flipped these guys from hey, Bigsby is the one you want in fantasy and Etienne is kind of this like ancillary committee back type thing?
I honestly think it's I would lean slightly above 50% for a few reasons right now. All the sample that we currently have, and the fact that Doug Peterson's job has been close to being on the line. We talk about Robert Saleh getting fired. Doug Peterson is at a point where he's like, I got to get my best players out there. I got to get some wins. Who's gripping off explosive plays left and right? Oh, the guy I hyped up all offseason in Tank Bigsby? Sure, I'll put him out on the field right now, and I think that that's maybe playing into this a little. Etienne did have a shoulder injury in week 4, wasn't on the injury report at all heading into week 5, so I don't know how much of a factor that was. So maybe we give him some grace there, but I think it's probably right now Etienne's outside my top 80 players the rest of the season, and Bigsby is pushing towards that. So if I had to pick one rest of the season, I would take Tank Bigsby in a 1-for-1 trade if that was ever an option.
Yeah, I mean, Jacksonville's run game is one that has been problematic over the course of the last few years, really with Travis Etienne as the lead back. I don't think it's all Etienne's fault, but Right now on the season, they're 14th in rushing success rate. They are top 6 in rushing EPA. And I think a lot of that has been the big plays and explosive runs that Tank Bigsby has brought. Like, anytime you see a team that's like average, right around the middle of the league in rushing success rate, but they're kind of up there in rushing EPA, it's same thing with passing too. Like that means that the big plays are pushing them up from an EPA perspective. That is what we're seeing with Tank Bigsby here. I think there's a lot of staying power to this role here with Tank Bigsby in Jacksonville. I'm with you that I think it's like slightly 50-50, maybe 60-40 that he just ends up being the better fantasy back in Jacksonville rest of season. Okay, let's move to your third note, which is about an offense that things aren't going so well for right now.
Yeah, the New England Patriots through 5 games this season are averaging 119 passing yards per play, by far the fewest, or passing yards per game, by far the fewest in the NFL right now. Poor offensive line is leading to Jacoby Brissett having no time to throw downfield. We saw this just a couple weeks ago in week 4. 168 yards for Brissett in that game was a season high, by the way, which it's just rough out here, but he threw over half of those passes and half of those receiving yards to checkdowns to running backs and tight ends. So when we're looking at like our excitement in the preseason, or some of it for a deep sleeper and like Jalen Polk, the rookie wide receiver 2nd round pick, maybe a Demario Douglas coming off of a decent year last year in the situation he was in, we're just not even getting options to be having the ball thrown downfield. Brissett's not making the throws when he has the time to. So it's to the point now, 119 yards per game. They're 1-4. I know you don't want to put Drake May, your rookie top 10 pick, behind a sketchy offensive line, but at some point, he's got to go out there. At some point, you have to sell tickets, make your fan base actually go to these games. If you were talking about coaching staffs, you have to try and get some wins and put a product on field. So I think it's probably time that we get Drake May. And if that's the case, maybe that creates at least a ceiling to where guys like, and this is for your 12-plus team leagues, Demario Douglas and Jalen Polk should be on rosters at that point if you can get a ceiling out of Drake May. Because right now is the absolute floor. 119 passing yards per game. By far the fewest in the NFL. It can only get better, you would think, from there.
Usually when someone says like it can't get any worse, I'm always like, I don't know, it could get worse. I don't know if it can get worse, because here's the thing. Yes, bad offensive line, pass protection's problematic. Kind of sucks that like, I think we probably, if I had to guess right now, I think we will get Drake May in week 6. Kind of sucks that his first game is going to come against Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson, and D'Amico Ryan's really tough. The Texans defense hasn't been like an elite unit or anything, but they're going to put, and they're blitzing more than D'Amico Ryan's ever has. They're playing a lot more man coverage because they've got 2 pretty good outside corners. That is a tough matchup for a rookie quarterback, but I'm with you that it's time. And especially, honestly, if I'm Jacoby Brissett at this point, whenever they talk about Brissett, they never say like, no, he's playing well. You guys don't see it. You don't really know. They're not doing that. They're like, we just can't put Drake May out there. If I'm Jacoby Brissett, like, look, I get it. That's what the money's for. But at the same time, I'll be like, yo, I'm not like, enough of the sacrificial stuff with me. Like, you're just putting me out there to not get the kid killed, but like, okay, I can get killed. What are we doing here? So I think we see Drake May this week, but does that like, okay, I'm with you that like it's going to be more exciting. He is going to, I think, bring more juice to the offense. Definitely going to bring more chaos to the offense. But sometimes when you're in the face of adversity and pressure and things like that from a pass rush perspective, sometimes a little chaos is kind of what you need. You need a dude who can create with his legs. Jacoby Brissett cannot. Drake May can. I think it will be more exciting. It will make a more interesting product. But from a bottom line perspective, does like Drake May being under center move the needle for you at all with this Patriots offense?
I think it does in some regards, yeah, from a kind of like a trickle-down standpoint. If he's out there, and again, you're throwing for more than 119 yards per game, it should open up some stuff on the ground for Ramondre Stevenson, who, like some people might think, is a sell-high candidate after this week, and that's fine. He's now had 3 top 5 finishes in 5 games. Stevenson is doing like everything on his own right now. It's all yards after contact because of this offensive line, because he's seeing a lot more, especially the last 2 weeks, just stack fronts against him. So if you could just have a quarterback that poses some sort of threat, you mentioned the scrambling, creating outside inside the pocket. I think that helps him. He's like the main guy I want to discuss here. And then anything that comes from these wide receivers in deeper leagues, maybe a Hunter Henry in the Alex Van Pelt offense, where if you get a stable quarterback, or at least better than what we're getting right now play, that can come into play on a year where tight ends look terrible. So I would say number one, Stevenson by far and away, what it can open up on the ground for him potentially. And then number two is probably like the Hunter Henry type guys to hold on to in some deeper bench leagues.
Yeah, and look, I think that when I imagined what Drake May would look like in Alex Van Pelt's offense and things like that, I thought he would be a guy that could do a lot of the Joe Flacco stuff that we saw at the end of last year. Boot out of the pocket. That's another thing, right? Like Drake May just like you might have to cut the field in half for him, but like you can boot him out of the pocket. You know, you can get him on some of these crossing like plays and kind of half field reads, things like that, simplify the picture. And I do think some of these guys fit well there. I mean, Jalen Polk has run 64 routes, according to Fantasy Points data, the last 2 weeks. 84.2% route participation is clearly the team leads by over 10%. But his average depth of target is 15.2. They have not just been having him run short routes. Like there's going to be some boom bust nature to that because I don't think Tolbert's like a real deal number one receiver or something like that. But he is a guy that he can make those plays downfield because he's got good hands, tight coverage plays. He's got that potential. So 13 targets, just 4 catches the last 2 weeks. That's not great, but if we get any sort of like efficiency bump with Drake May, he could be a player that is interesting and is widely available in Yahoo leagues. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum here in terms of an offense that, is a little bit better than the New England Patriots. Let's talk Dallas for your fourth point here.
Yeah, the Dallas Cowboys, I wanted to look at what these first read target shares or the target shares in general were without Brandon Cooks for the first game as he's on IR now. And in this game, we got Jalen Tolbert, their third-year wide receiver, leading the way with a 26% target share. CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson at 18%. And then you could trickle down Kevontae Turpin, 13%. Rico Dowdle, the running back, 5%. So the thing that stands out here, and really if you watch this game, was Jalen Tolbert. Had an explosive play of 48 yards in this game. Had the game-winning touchdown less than 30 seconds on a fourth down in that game. And he led the team with 10 targets. Had a nice fantasy day out there. And it's sort of the story of like Jalen Tolbert to this point that's interesting to me. Comes into the league, gets drafted in 2022, third-round pick. Mari Cooper's gone. Michael Gallup's dealing with injuries. Like they put kind of a lot of pressure on Jalen Tolbert, at least in camp in the preseason, to be a starter right away, potentially a top 2 or 3 receiver on this team right away. And it just flat out didn't work. He had 2 catches his rookie year. Tolbert comes into last year's training camp and is pretty honest with the media. Like, yeah, I was coming from South Alabama. I wasn't ready for Dallas Cowboys NFL starting job. And since then, it's slowly gotten better. We saw flashes of it last year. This year now, at least for fantasy, 13 or more fantasy points in 3 out of 5 games. That's a flex option. That's a wide receiver 2 for you. That's a solid producer. And Brandon Cook's out at least out the next 3 weeks. Even when he returns, if Tolbert continues to play this way, giving them another option outside of CeeDee Lamb on the opposite side, I think he can hold this job. And that's the big thing here. Defenses have to focus on CeeDee Lamb. To some extent, they have to focus on Jake Ferguson. Tolbert's going to be in beneficial matchups, and I do think that he's somebody that moving forward should be a priority waiver ad if he's available. I don't think he's a top 20, top 24 wide receiver, but to fill in for buys, probably pushing towards that top 30 wide receiver range, and that's valuable.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see this on our outline. I just put an old tweet of mine posting his route chart. Jalen Tolbert coming out of South Alabama, only 4 games, but reception perception wise, he actually played. He was a pretty good prospect. Now I didn't go crazy on him because he was from South Alabama. I still kind of had him as a late 3rd, early 4th, like round draft pick in terms of my stacked rankings, things like that. But I definitely thought he could play. I was disappointed he didn't get rocking and rolling early. But the story that you point out there makes so much sense about like he's coming from South Alabama. These guys from lower levels, for the most part, unless they're like all-star prospects, which Tolbert wasn't. He was an older player too. Like they're not ready to rock at the NFL level here, but now it looks like it's coming together for Tolbert. And I just charted this game, the Steelers game, about an hour before we got on here. And I was really interested in the way they were using Tolbert because in my mind, and I know I said this on the recap, I thought he was kind of more of like he'd be in that Michael Gallup type of role, boundary X receiver. Not really, man. Like he was an outside receiver, but he still got some reps out of the slot. He was in the slot on over 30% of his plays. He was an off the ball player, which means he was usually used to create some leverage sometimes. And I will say, I'm gonna give Mike McCarthy some credit in this game. I really liked the way they were calling this offense. From a route combination standpoint, it's a lot of the same stuff that I've banged on the Jets for. It's a very simple stripped down route tree, very old kind of West Coasty type principles. But they're doing stuff with like tight ends, motion these guys out, making like the full speed motion at the snap, creating a little bit of leverage for these guys. They're using CeeDee Lamb as the X receiver more often, which opens up so much opportunity for the guys on the other side of the field, like a Ferguson, like a Tolbert. And I thought Tolbert played well too. Really did a good job against zone coverage, getting his routes to the right depth. He just looks like a dude who's sort of like, as you said, figured it out here, and a coaching staff that looks like they're trusting him more. Yeah, I think that there's actually a pretty undersold bit of upside here for Jalen Tolbert going forward, because Brandon Cooks at this point, I think it's kind of a little bit over for Brandon Cooks. He also doesn't really fit this offense in the route tree they want to run here. So high scoring matchup in week 6, potentially with the Detroit Lions. I know they have better outside corners than slot corners, things like that, but they're using Jalen Tolbert in the slot a little bit too. So I'm very curious to see what he can do in this game.
Yeah, that's what I was going to point to, is that matchup. 52, 53 point total, depending on where you look, should be the best game environment for fantasy. The Lions allow the 6th most passing yards per play. Now they are coming out of the bye. Maybe they clean some things up on their defense, but Tolbert's role right now, like 13.2 average depth of target. Now, sometimes it doesn't matter if your quarterback's not accurate or consistent, but at least in this situation, I think that we can trust Dak Prescott to get the ball to Tolbert. 13.2 yards is that perfect for me, at least when I'm looking at it, that perfect in between of like, this player can create big plays, like we saw on a 48-yard catch in that game, but also has enough underneath targets for either yards after the catch ability or just to have receptions, like actually convertible targets. So I think the role is like sneaky good when he's going to see the other team's number 2 cornerback every week.
Yeah, I feel like I compare players to this guy all the time, but it reminds me a little bit of like Marvin Jones. Not a super special or explosive dude, but technically sound, does the right things, and that's kind of where I think Jalen Tolbert is sort of sliding into that type of role. And also the fact that, last point on Tolbert, the fact that they're trusting him to play all 3 receiver positions, because he did do some X receiver stuff in this game as well. That's so huge. It's a big deal in this offense. They want that. I've talked to CeeDee Lamb about that a lot over the years. That was one of he carries a heavy burden, have to play all 3 receiver positions, and because he has to do it, all the other dudes on the offense has to do it. So that is a big piece of staying power, I think, for Jalen Tolbert to remain on the field. Okay, now let's talk about really one of my favorite receivers in the NFL for your final point here.
Yeah, Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. He's now played in 3 games since returning from injury, and during that time, he leads the Colts with a 30% target share. But not just overall. Every single one of those weeks, he's led the team with the highest target share, 27%, 27%, and 24%. And now he's coming off of a week where he saw 12 targets, which was a team high. We got some reports in training camp of like, Downs looks like the best wide receiver on this team right now. Like, obviously, Michael Pittman was there, so you kind of are just like, okay, it's training camp hype or whatever. Then he gets hurt. But right now, at least the last 3 weeks, in terms of earning volume and doing things with that volume, he's looking like the best Colts wide receiver on this 3-game sample. The usage is also great. First play of the game, Downs is put in motion, 12-yard gain across the formation out of the slot. It's not just these short passes. Later, he gets a deep crosser for 20 yards. And then on a 3rd down, and this is what I want to talk about more, these 3rd down plays, Josh Downs over the middle of the field for a key 1st down pickup of 6 yards. Downs now through 3 games has 10 targets on 3rd or 4th down. The rest of the Colts wide receivers, the other 4 or 5 guys that have been used this year, have combined for just 11 targets in those key situations, and they've played 2 more games than Josh Downs. The coaching staff is trusting him. Joe Flacco's trusting him. Also, Anthony Richardson has targeted him 2 times on 3rd or 4th downs so far this season in their 1 game together. They're just going to Downs in these key situations. He's getting open. That's part of it as well. And I know Richardson coming back could hurt some of the passing offense, but if there was one guy who's like talented enough to continue to get scheme production and just get open, I think I trust Downs the most in this passing attack.
Ooh, I love this take, man. I'm a big Josh Downs fan. He's a guy who, like you said, he gets open. He's a reception perception kind of legend, based on both his prospect profile and his rookie season profile as well. He was one of the best success rate versus man coverage players that charted last year, and like that's legit, dude. He is always open. And I'm not saying that like Josh Downs is the most important wide receiver to his team among any receiver in the NFL or something like that, but I do think there's a little bit of a correlation to Anthony Richardson kind of struggling as a passer. Josh Downs gets in there, and then immediately Richardson is out. Like, we haven't seen those guys kind of fully linked up together. Like, is Richardson going to become a 60% passer now that Josh Downs is in there? Probably not, but we could get above like freaking 50% or something like that. I think he is the type of receiver that's a quarterback settler. gets those guys kind of a little calmed down from a Richardson perspective. So I think most people will take the stance, Sal, that none of this matters because Joe Flacco's going to go back to the bench. Richardson's going to come in here and tank the value of all these receivers. I lean that way a little bit, right? I think there's a part of me that does just not want to get too excited about this, but I'm leaving the candle lit that a guy like Josh Downs can really help this offense. And I don't know, are you saying he could end up being the most valuable wide receiver on this team?
Yeah, I do think so. Like right now, it's not how I have it ranked rest of the season. I do have Pittman ahead of him, but it's really not that far. Like Pittman's in my low 71 right now is where Pittman is at, and Josh Downs is in my mid 80s rest of the season. So it's very close. And I do think, like you mentioned, the first couple weeks Downs wasn't here. You had guys like Adonai Mitchell, a rookie, playing out of the slot at times, just kind of not where he's supposed to be playing for his skill set. And I think that's going to factor into maybe not having a good connection with your slot wide receiver for Anthony Richardson. Maybe it factors into completion percentage a little bit, but there's another piece to this. Like Richardson will come back. Either he starts playing better and that helps Downs, or you can only take like 3 or 4 more games of a 50% completion percentage before Joe Flacco's back out there, and that helps Downs. So I do think there are some outs for the rest of the season to Josh Downs if Richardson continues to struggle. And if he doesn't, well, even better.
I love it. Hey, I'm never going to push back on any Josh Downs hype. I love this guy. All right, let's take our final break, and then we'll get to Sal's 3 moves you need to make heading into week 6 right after this. All right, we're back. Sal, give us your first move that the people need to make heading into week 6.
Yeah, I want to buy low on the Bills wide receiver Khalil Shakur or just trade for him in general. He missed week 5 with an ankle injury. Now, he didn't practice all week, so there is a chance that he could miss week 6. Has an extra day, though. It's on Monday Night Football against the Jets. Again, not a great matchup, so it's not for this week. It's for the rest of the season because I think the fact that he's injured creates a little bit of a buy low situation. And in week 5 without Khalil Shakur, Allen completed 30% of his passes, only at 131 yards. Now, it's not only because Shakir was out in this game, but you look at the past weeks, when he's under pressure, Josh Allen, he's looking for Khalil Shakir on the field. This past week when he wasn't out there, Josh Allen was under pressure 13 times, had 0 completions, completed 0 passes according to PFF on 13 under pressured snaps. So I think that plays into it a little bit. Maybe Shakir is the number 1 wide receiver on this team. I don't think we still know, but if there was a guy I would want to have, it would be him. And I don't think you got to pay that much to get him right now. Maybe you trade 1-for-1 Tank Bigsby for him. I would do that.
Ooh, I like that. The thing is that, Josh Allen's struggles in this game and the Bills' offensive struggles in this last game against Houston were not just because of Khalil Shakir not being there, but it wasn't not because Khalil, that was a pretty big factor in why they struggled because he just gives Allen, as you mentioned, that layup, that answer. A lot of what I said about Josh Downs with Anthony Richardson, that's what I'm kind of hoping Josh Downs can be. Khalil Shakir is definitely that quarterback settling wide receiver. And even if he does play in this matchup against the Jets, I still think he's going to be like in the flex kind of radar, even if it's a tougher spot, just because this Bills offense is going to struggle to push the ball to the perimeters between Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed on the outside as the Jets cornerbacks. They're going to be getting a lot of pressure. I mean, Khalil Shakir is going to be catching, he might catch like 7 to 8 balls if he plays in this game just because he's going to have to be that answer to pressure, and he's going to be the guy that is open. Those dudes on the outside, Matt Collins, Keon Coleman, those guys are not getting open. They're not really using Curtis Samuel. So I think when Shakir is out there, he's wide receiver 30 in terms of points per game right now, and that's probably where I think he settles. I don't know if he really can get inside the top 15 or something like that just because of overall volume, but dude, part of me watches that game last week and I'm like, why are we not throwing the ball to him 8, 9, 10 times a game? So I love him as a buy candidate in this one.
Yeah, and he's a good player, especially with the ball in his hands after the catch. He actually gives them some sort of juice. He can create big plays on his own. And you have a quarterback in Josh Allen who can definitely help him create some big plays downfield at times too. So that's just kind of the combination I want to be buying right now. This injury does not seem like it's anything major. Maybe he misses one more game. Okay, fine. His price point becomes even cheaper than maybe for you if he's out this week. So I'm trying to get Khalil Shakur.
Jets this week for the Bills, then the Titans. Then it's a pretty tasty matchup between the Seahawks and then the Dolphins, and then the Colts. So there is definitely some potential if the Bills figure their offense out for Shakir to be a starting player here in the next few weeks. Okay, let's stay in the AFC East, and we got another buy candidate here for your second move to make.
Yeah, Miami Dolphins running back Devon Achane. Any fantasy manager who has him right now doesn't want to hear this at all, but it's the lowest value you're ever going to see, or the stock, if you want to say, of Devon Achane right now. He had a concussion. He came out of the game last week. He doesn't return. He's probably, if there was a game this upcoming week, would miss that game, but he's on bye. So that helps him. Right now, he's seen his fantasy production drop in 4 straight games. Hasn't had over 10 fantasy points since Tua has been out of the starting lineup the last 3 weeks. So everything is looking bad. And then you even look at week 5 in that game where Raheem Mostert almost has 100 total yards. Jalen Wright looks good on the ground in that one. So it's like adding insult to injury that Devonta Chan couldn't be out there for what looks like the Dolphins offense at least got some things looking a little bit better without Tua. But I think it's just a buy low opportunity because this guy, at least in my opinion, if indeed Tua returns in week 8, which is just one more game that they would have to miss because of the bye being in there, he's trending to return, it seems like right now, Tua. And if that's the case, you've had 2 performances with A-Chain and Tua this year. He was a top 5 running back finish in both of those. We know the upside that he has. I still think he's a top 25 rest of season player. And my guess is most people who are managers of him right now don't view him anywhere near that. So if you can trade away, and these sound like some big names, I know, but like a DJ Moore for him, I would do that right now, assuming you're in a situation where you're 3-2, even 2-3. If you're 1-4, obviously 0-5, maybe you go for somewhere else. But at this point, I would trade DJ Moore for Devonta Chan.
Yeah, and I mean, look, here a couple different things here. This is a very spicy one. I think most people would not want to buy this guy right now, but that's kind of the whole point here. We're playing it. We're leaning into that. We're leaning into the psychology of it. A couple things here that I think are interesting. Number one, Dolphins they were 15th in rushing EPA among all teams in week 5. 15th might not sound crazy. Look at where the Dolphins ranked before this in terms of their rushing offense. It was a stone cold disaster. A lot of that was with Devin Achane as the lead back, but I think actually taking him out of that lead back role and like having Raheem Mostert back in the mix is a pretty big deal for Achane, because we just get these like grinder carries off his plate and he could be used in more interesting ways. Look, he only ran 6 routes in this game before having the concussion, but he was targeted once on those routes. So like he's a guy that might get more of just the passing game work if we can get Raheem Mostert kind of taking some of those grinder carries. You mentioned Tua coming back. I hate to like speculate on it. That's probably what's going to happen. It feels like, just because of where their season is. I don't know if that's the right thing to do. That's not my job. But week 8 matchup with the Cardinals, Bills in week 9, Rams in week 10, Raiders in week 11. There are some nice spots here for the Dolphins offense if they can get their quarterback back and get their offense back on track.
Yeah, and A-Chain himself, he's been fine. 6th in yards per route run, 4th in yards created. It's really just these past couple of weeks of rotating through different quarterbacks. Skylar Thompson comes in, he gets hurt mid-game. Now it's Tyler Huntley coming in on a short week. That's probably just going to make this offense look messy. Tyler Huntley had an entire week to practice, and it looked better. Didn't look great, but it looked better, as you were alluding to some of the rushing EPA stats for the offense. So, yeah, I think that this is a player, if nothing ever happened to Tua, would have been a top 10 player, top 12 player rest of season. And if Tua does indeed come back and just one more game is missed, I think he has that opportunity to get right back in there during the second half of the year.
All right, give us your final move to make, and this one's a little bit more of a negative move.
Yeah, a little bit more of a negative move in some regards is to trade away Nick Chubb if he's on your roster right now. I saw this past week, Nick Chubb practiced every day, a limited participant, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's great. This guy 13 months ago had a brutal injury. It could have taken up to 2 years for him to really feel himself, and he's already back on the practice field. Everything for him looked like he was just grateful to be out there. So all that is fantastic, but I think the expectations right now are that Nick Chubb might play in week 6, which is possible. He might play in week 7, one of those weeks, and just go right back to as if nothing was an issue. 2 points here. Even if Nick Chubb was an absolute freak, and it seems like he is, he's come back from an injury like this when he was a younger man before, and he's like the same old Nick Chubb. No drop in his success rate, no drop in his abilities. This is still a terrible offense with an offensive line right now that is 31st in the NFL, according to PFF, in run blocking. Jerome Ford's been able to do absolutely nothing behind it. In general, this offense has not been able to sustain drives, so that's not all that encouraging. There's some high value, or at least a stock up on Chubb right now because he's coming back, but nobody's really looking at the situation. And even if he has come back, say the abilities aren't there because of the injury. Say it takes him 3, 4, 5+ weeks to actually get ramped back up to not a split backfield with a guy like Jerome Ford. That's probably not something that people are expecting who have him right now. So I think if there is an opportunity to trade him 1-for-1 for like a Rashid Shaheed or something along those lines because of his name value and the excitement of Nick Chubb practicing, I would do it.
I have 2 teams with Nick Chubb. One's a dynasty team, and then one is a redraft league where I'm actually doing really well. Just beat Dalton Del Don. Shout out to me in this most recent matchup. And like that team's again, it's probably a contender to win the league. The dynasty team, we'll see about that. So I don't know, man. I don't know if I have the stones to sell Nick Chubb just because I'm looking at my running back room. I'm like, I kind of need this guy, man. I need Nick Chubb to come back. Maybe not even be Nick Chubb, but I just need him to be like a useful player in fantasy. But you are making some good points here. I will say, I'm with you. The offense is a mess. The line's problematic. We know the whole Deshaun Watson thing. They're probably not going to bench him this week, but if and when they ever made a quarterback change, would that kind of change your calculus about just the stance of the offense overall, or is it too far gone at this point?
Yeah, it would have to change my stance. What we're seeing out of Deshaun Watson is like bottom tier quarterback play at this point. So anything even close to like the 20th best quarterback in the league, sustain drives, get to the red zone, that opens up touchdown opportunities for a guy like Nick Chubb if he's out there. But I think it's just a lot of ifs have to happen correctly. Right. He has to look like himself. He has to get ramped up quicker than people expect if you're trying to get to the fantasy postseason, which is, quickly approaching, just 2 months away at this point, and then the offensive line get healthy, all these things. So I feel like it's a lot of ifs. I'd rather just trade him for a known quantity. George Pickens off a bad week, a Rashid Shaheed who's just trending in the right direction at all times.
Yeah, I'm looking at this team. It's 6-4 because we've got, not that anyone cares about my team, just because we also play against like the points scored or whatever. I don't know. With this running back room, I had to start Justice Hill last week because Jahmyr Gibbs is on a bye. I don't know if I can afford to trade Nick Chubb, but you've made good points. I will at least consider it in terms of whether I'm going to ship off Nick Chubb. But for the people out there that are more brave, more courageous than me, for sure, you guys should probably consider taking Sal's advice about trading away Nick Chubb, because I agree with you. Like, the excitement and the hope and the hype and the optimism might be like the best thing that we get out of Nick Chubb this year. That is definitely in the range of outcomes. Not what I'm rooting for. I want to see like Nick Chubb out there and absolutely killing it in a better version of the Browns offense that's more based around him than whatever the hell they're trying to do with all this empty shotgun stuff with Deshaun Watson. But we shall see if it works out. Sal, appreciate you, buddy. Another great episode. Tell the people what else you have coming on the Yahoo airwaves this week.
Yeah, by the time you're listening to this, it'll probably be out Wednesday. The trades article, trade targets before week 6 begins. Thursday, our matchups to exploit across all the skill positions. And Friday is the key findings for the week. Kind of sums up a bunch of stuff like this podcast here. Some cool stats you should know before your matchup begins.
Well, definitely make sure to read Sal's trade article, especially if you're going to get some more Khalil Shakir propaganda, because that is definitely a dude that I think I'm going to try to trade for Khalil Shakir this week, because I do love the player and love all the points that Sal made. That is going to do it for us today. Tomorrow, we'll be back in the fantasy film room with Nate Tice. A lot of interesting things to break down heading into week 6. Really a good point of the season to take a big picture view. That's what we're going to do tomorrow. Until then, we are out.